My name is Della Marsh. I am 41 years old, and I am an ER charge nurse, which means I am the one who stays calm when everyone else can't. A lawyer's letter came to me on a Tuesday. It slid across the kitchen table, the same table where our father used to carve the Sunday roast, back when there was a father, back when the house was ours together. The letter said I owed $61,200. It called the money a loan. I had never taken a loan in my life. I set my coffee down. I did not argue. You should know how they said it out loud, because that part matters more than the paper. It was Corinne, my sister-in-law, at a crowded family dinner. She looked right at me and she said, "It was always a loan, Della. Family doesn't just hand a grown woman $38,000. There were 11 relatives at that table. Aunts, cousins, my own mother. 11 people who watched her say it. And not one of them said otherwise. Not one." So the next morning I got in my car. I drove to the credit union. And I asked them for a copy of a file that everyone in my family assumed had been shredded 9 years ago. I'm not going to tell you yet what was in it. But I will tell you this. If you have ever been treated as invisible by your own family, this story is for you. Before I go on, do something for me. If you're the kind of person who believes the quiet ones deserve to be heard, subscribe to this channel, because these are the only stories I tell. And in the comments, tell me the city you're watching from. Just the city. I want to see how far this story travels. I really do. Now let me take you back, all the way back. Because to understand the letter, you have to understand what came before it. And what came before it was love. Real love. The kind you can't fake and shouldn't have to prove. Let me tell you about my father first. Walter Marsh was a plain man in a plain town. We lived in Delford, Ohio, which you have never heard of, and there is no reason you should have. It has one traffic light that blinks yellow after 9. It has a diner and a hardware store and a church with a crack in the bell that the town voted twice not to fix, because the crack was part of the sound now. My father fixed things, not for a living, for everyone. Storm doors, lawn mowers, the neighbor's furnace at 2 in the morning in January. He never sent a bill. When I asked him why, he said a favor with a price on it isn't a favor. It's a sale. I was maybe 9. I have never forgotten it. I was the second child. My brother Grant came first, 4 years ahead of me, and Grant was the sun the rest of us orbited. I don't say that with bitterness. It's just weather. It's just how the house was built. Grant got the bigger plate and the benefit of the doubt and the story where he was always about to do something great. I got the dishes. I learned early that the way to be loved in my family was to be useful and to not ask for much. So that's what I became. Useful, quiet, reliable as a light switch. I went into nursing at 19. It fit me. In the ER, nobody asks if you're the favorite. They ask if you're steady. And I was steady. I worked nights for 11 years. I held hands that were letting go. I learned that a calm voice can do more than a loud one, and that the people who scream the loudest are usually the least hurt. I learned to watch what people do, not what they say. That last part is going to matter. Here is the thing about being the useful one. Nobody notices the weight until you set it down, and I never set it down. When my mother's heart started to give out, when the cardiologist started using words like arrhythmia and monitoring and we should keep an eye on this, guess who kept the eye on it? Me. I drove Eleanor to every appointment. Every single one. 40 minutes each way to the specialist in the next county. In the dark. After a 12-hour shift, and I never once told her I was tired, because she didn't want to hear it, and I didn't want to say it. And there was the insurance. My mother had a supplemental policy, the kind that covers what the main one won't. And 1 year money got tight for my parents, and the premium went unpaid, and the policy almost lapsed. She would have lost the coverage right when her heart was starting to fail. So I paid it. Quietly. And then I paid it the next month. And the next. I paid my mother's supplemental insurance premium for 6 years. 6 years. I never mentioned it. I set up the payment, and I let it run, and I told myself that's what a good daughter does. And I believed it, and I still believe it. That part I don't regret. Remember that number. 6 years. It's going to sit strangely next to another number later. Now, the house. When I was 32, I decided I wanted a home of my own. Not a big one. A modest 2-bedroom on Alder Street with a front porch that faced west, so the evening light came in gold across the floorboards. It cost $214,000, which in Delford is a real number, a serious number for a single woman on a nurse's wage. I had saved. I always saved. But I was short on the down payment, and short on it in a way that a bank cares about very much. My father was already sick by then, the kind of sick that everyone can see and nobody says out loud. He'd lost weight. His hands, those big fixing hands, had started to shake. And one afternoon he asked me to sit down at that kitchen table, the roast table, and he pushed an envelope across it toward me. Inside was a check for $38,500. I said no. Of course I said no. I said, "Dad, you can't. You need this. What about Mom? What about the medical bills?" And my father, who did not waste words, put his shaking hand flat on the envelope, and he looked at me, and he said something I have carried every day since. He said, "No strings, Della. A house is a place they can't take from you. Let me give you one thing they can't take." I didn't understand who they was. Not then. I thought he meant the world. Landlords, bad luck. Life. I told myself he meant life. I know better now. I took the money. I hugged him and I felt every rib, and I told him I loved him, and he said he knew. And that was the gift. That was the whole gift. Given freely by a dying man at the table where he'd fed us all our lives. Now I need you to pay very close attention, because here is where the story hides the thing that saves it, and it hides it in plain sight, in the most boring moment you can imagine. The closing. If you've ever bought a house, you know a closing is death by paperwork. You sign until your hand cramps and you don't read half of it, and a woman you've never met slides pages at you and points at the line and says initial here, sign here, date here. That was my closing. Our credit union handled the mortgage, the little local one on Main with the eagle on the sign. And somewhere in that mountain of paper, the loan officer stopped and looked at where the down payment had come from. Because the money came from my parents, not from my own savings, the lender had a rule. A gift of that size can't just appear. It has to be documented. The bank has to know it's a gift and not a secret second loan, because a secret loan changes everything about whether they'll lend to you. So they required what's called a gift letter. A single page. It states in plain language that the money is a gift and that no repayment is expected. Ever. And it has to be signed by the people giving the gift. So my parents signed it. Both of them. I can still see it. My father's hand shaking, so the letters came out blocky and careful, the way a man writes when he's fighting his own fingers for control of the pen. And beside his signature, my mother's. Eleanor Marsh in her neat schoolteacher cursive, the same hand that signed my report cards. The credit union notarized it right there. Stamped it. Dated it. The line above their names read, "This is a bona fide gift with no expectation of repayment." No expectation of repayment. They both signed under those words. My mother and my father. In front of a notary. 9 years ago. I took my copy home, and my father did one more thing. One small thing. The kind of thing you don't notice is a miracle until years later. He took a plain manila envelope, and he wrote one word on the front of it, in that same blocky, careful hand. He wrote house. All capitals, and he put the gift letter inside, and he said, "Keep this somewhere it won't burn." So I did. I put it in a small gray fireproof box I keep in my closet, the kind you buy for birth certificates and passports, and the deed to a life. And then I closed the box, and I closed the closet, and I did not think about that envelope again for 9 years. I never throw away paperwork. Never have. It's a nurse thing, maybe. Document everything. Because the day you didn't is the day you needed it. But I want to be honest with you. I didn't keep that letter because I was clever. I didn't keep it because some part of me saw this coming. I kept it because I keep everything. It sat in the dark for 9 years, and I forgot it existed. That envelope is going to save my whole life. And on the day I filed it, I couldn't have told you what year it was from. My father died 4 years ago, in the spring. There were daffodils out, which felt like a cruelty. And when he went, something in the family changed shape, the way a house settles after you take out a load-bearing wall. He was the one who set the rules of decency without ever saying them. He was the one who believed a favor with a price on it wasn't a favor. And when he was gone, that belief left with him. And I don't think anyone noticed but me. For a while, things were quiet. Grief makes people gentle for a season. My mother leaned on me even harder. And I let her. Because that's the arrangement. That's the deal I signed the day I was born the useful one. I drove her to appointments. I managed her pills. I called every Sunday. And my brother Grant, up in his part of the county, ran his contracting business and told everyone at every holiday that things were great. Business was booming. Never better. Business was not booming. I didn't know that yet. That's a piece of the story I only got later, and I'll give it to you when I got it, because I want you to feel it the way I felt it, in the wrong order, arriving too late to protect me. But I'll tell you the shape of it now so you're not surprised. My brother's company was dying. Slowly, then all at once the way they do. He was the family's success story, and the success story was hollow, and hollow things need to be filled, and Grant went looking for something to fill his with. He found me. The first shot was so small, I almost missed it. That's how these things start. Not with a lawyer. Not with a demand. With a text. Walter's estate had finally settled, and it settled thin. There wasn't much. My father had given most of what he had while he was alive, quietly, to whoever needed it, and the estate reflected a generous man's empty pockets. I think that disappointed some people. I think some people had been counting on more. And a few weeks after the estate closed, my phone buzzed on the counter while I was making dinner. It was Corinne, my sister-in-law, Grant's wife. And you should know a little about Corinne, because she is the architect of everything that follows, and she did it all with a smile. Corinne is the kind of woman who runs the family group chat and remembers everyone's birthday and hosts the barbecue and is, by universal agreement, wonderful. She organizes. She manages. She has a talent I didn't fully understand until she turned it on me, which is the talent of making a story so smooth and so reasonable that people stop checking whether it's true. She doesn't shout. She narrates. And by the time she's done narrating, everyone in the room remembers it her way. The text said, "Hey Della, now that Dad's gone and everything's settled, I think we should sit down and talk about what the family fronted you for the house. No rush. Just want to get everyone on the same page." I read it twice. What the family fronted you. Fronted, like a loan. Like an advance. Like something with a due date. I want to tell you that alarms went off. They didn't. My whole life had trained me to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to give before I was even asked. And that training is a kind of blindness. It really is. So instead of feeling the threat in that message, I felt the pull to fix it, to make Corinne comfortable, to resolve the awkwardness. I texted back something warm, something accommodating. I said, of course, happy to talk anytime, and I added a heart back. God help me. I added a heart. I thought I was being gracious. I was actually confirming their whole theory. Every soft word I sent them, they filed as evidence. She's not pushing back. She knows. She feels guilty. Look how quickly she agreed to talk. That's the blind spot. And I'm telling you about mine, so you'll watch for yours. I assumed love is remembered. I assumed that because I remembered my father's shaking hand and the words no strings, everyone else remembered it too. I assumed the truth was safe, just because it was true. The truth is never safe, just because it's true. The truth has to be kept, written down, notarized, put in a fireproof box by a dying man who knew something I didn't. The second wave came in July at the barbecue. Corinne hosts it every year, in their backyard with the good grill and the string lights, and the whole extended family comes. The aunts and the cousins and the second cousins, whose names I always have to be reminded of. It's meant to be the happy day. And for most of it, it was. I brought a pasta salad. I held somebody's baby. I laughed at a story I'd heard 4 times. And then, near the grill, with a paper plate in my hand, I heard my brother's voice do a thing it does when he's performing for an audience. It goes a little louder, a little smoother. Grant was standing with a beer, and one of our cousins, Ray, and he was talking. And I caught the tail of it, and the tail of it was about me. He said, 38.5, and honestly it was a loan. We were all just too polite to paper it. You know how Dad was. Handshake deal. But it was understood. Too polite to paper it. Now, I knew that wasn't true. I knew there was paper. I had signed some of it myself. But here's what my blind spot did to me in that moment, and I'm ashamed of it, and I'm telling you anyway. I didn't correct him. I didn't say, Grant, that's not what happened. There was a document. Dad signed it. Mom signed it. I felt the old reflex, the useful one reflex, the keep the peace reflex. I walked over with my paper plate and my soft voice, and I said, hey, you know I'd never want anything to be weird about the house. I want to help however I can. If money's tight, talk to me. If money's tight, talk to me. I thought I was being kind. I thought I was offering an olive branch. What Grant and Corinne heard was a confession. They heard the debtor acknowledging the debt, in their version of the evening, which is the version they told everyone afterward. Della basically admitted it. She offered to help pay it back. She feels the obligation. She just needs to be reminded. Ray, the cousin, heard the whole thing too. And Ray, who is not a bad man but is a lazy listener, filed it exactly the way Grant wanted him to. So now there was a witness. Now the story had a second teller. That's how it spreads. You plant it in one head, and then a second, and by the time it reaches the 11 at the table, it isn't Grant's claim anymore. It's just what everybody knows. I drove home from that barbecue feeling good. Can you believe that? I felt good. I felt like I'd headed off a conflict. I turned onto Alder Street, and the evening light came gold across my porch. My porch, the one my father bought me a piece of, and I felt like a woman who had kept the peace. I had not kept the peace. I had loaded the gun and handed it over and complimented them on the grip. The third wave was the one that broke something in me. And I need to slow down here, because this is the one that still lives in my chest, and if I go too fast, I'll skip the part that matters. It was a Sunday, family dinner at my mother's house, which is really still my father's house, the roast carving house, though nobody carves anything anymore. Corinne organizes these dinners now. She sets the table. She decides the seating. And on this particular Sunday, there were 11 of us. I counted later, over and over, the way you count stairs in the dark. 11. My mother at the head. Grant and Corinne, their daughter Josie, 17, who I'll come back to because she is the one clean thing in all of this. 2 aunts. Uncle Pete. Cousin Ray and his wife. 2 others I'll spare you. 11 witnesses. Dinner was normal until it wasn't. There was pot roast and there were rolls, and there was the particular loud, comfortable noise of a family that thinks it's fine. And then, during a lull, Corinne set down her fork and she reached into her bag, and she brought out a piece of paper, and she smoothed it on the table beside her plate, the way a dealer smooths a card. She said, "So, I've been thinking we should just be grown-ups about the house money." I did some figuring. The table got quieter. Not all at once. In a wave, the way a room does when it senses something. Corinne turned the paper so I could see it, though she didn't hand it over. It was handwritten. Her neat, organized hand, columns and numbers, and at the top it said the down payment amount, $38,500, and then a column of years, 9 of them, and a percentage, 6%, compounded, and at the bottom, circled, was a number, $61,200. With interest, she said. Pleasant as anything. It's only fair. Money isn't free, Della. If you'd borrowed that from a bank, you'd have paid interest. So really, this is generous. I looked at that circled number, and I felt the floor of the room tilt very slightly, the way it does right before a patient codes, that half second where you already know. And then my brother's wife looked around the table at all 11 faces, and she said the sentence. The one I told you at the very start. She said it slow, and she said it warm, and she said it like a woman stating an obvious kindness. She said, "It was always a loan, Della. Family doesn't just hand a grown woman $38,000. Here is what I want you to understand about that sentence. It isn't an argument. It's a spell. Family doesn't just hand a grown woman that much money. It sounds like common sense. It sounds like something your own grandmother would nod at. And it does something sneaky. It makes the truth sound naive. It makes remembering my father's shaking hand and his voice saying no strings sound like a child's fairy tale." In one sentence, she turned a gift into a debt and turned me into a woman too foolish to know the difference. And I waited. I waited for someone to say it. Someone at that table had to remember. My mother had signed the letter. My mother's own hand was on the document. All she had to do was say, "No, Corinne, that's not right. Walter and I gave her that money. We signed papers saying so. I was there." I looked at my mother. Eleanor Marsh looked down at her plate, down at the pot roast, and in a small voice, a voice I did not recognize, my mother said, "I don't remember it being a gift, Della. I don't remember it being a gift. I have watched people die and kept my face still. I have told parents the worst thing a person can be told and not let my voice shake, because they needed me steady. I am very, very good at keeping my face still. And I kept it still then. But something behind it went cold and quiet and far away, like a light going off at the end of a long hall. She signed it. My mother signed the gift letter. Her name was under the words, "No expectation of repayment," in her own cursive, notarized, in the fireproof box in my closet. And she sat at her dead husband's table and said she didn't remember it being a gift. Now, I didn't know yet that the letter still existed. That's the terrible part I need you to sit in with me. In that moment, I didn't think, aha, I have proof. I had forgotten the envelope. 9 years it sat in the dark, and I had genuinely forgotten it. So in that moment, I had nothing but my memory and my father's shaking hand. And my mother had just told a table of 11 people that my memory was wrong. I looked around at the 11. The aunts studied their food. Uncle Pete found something fascinating about his water glass. Ray, my witness from the barbecue, gave a little shrug like this. All made sense to him. Not one person met my eyes. Not one person said, "Wait." The silence at that table was not empty. It was full. It was a decision. Every one of them had chosen, in that second, that it was easier to let it happen to me than to make it stop. That's the wound, and I want to name it exactly, because if you felt it, you already know, and if you haven't, I want you to see it clearly. The wound was not the number. The wound was not even Corinne's spell. The wound was the 11. It was an account being opened against me before 11 pairs of eyes, and every one of those eyes deciding to look away. In my family, I had spent 41 years being useful and being reliable, and being the steady one, and when the moment came to be defended, I was invisible. My father saw the they coming, and I never believed him. Now, I believed him. The they was at the table, passing the rolls. I did not shout. I want you to know that, because it's the hinge of everything that comes after. I did not cry, though it cost me something not to. I set my fork down on my plate. Quietly, the little click of it was the loudest thing in the room. And I said, in my steady ER voice, the calm and the code voice, I think I'll head home. Nobody stopped me. Of course nobody stopped me. I got my coat. I said goodnight to no one in particular. And as I reached the door, a hand touched my sleeve. Small, cool, it was Josie, my niece. 17 years old, Grant and Corinne's girl, the one who had sat through that whole dinner watching the adults do an ugly thing. She looked up at me with her mother's face and none of her mother's smoothness, and she said something so quietly that only I could hear it. She said, "Aunt Della, Dad's company is in trouble. Like, really in trouble. I heard him and Mom fighting about payroll, and then she said the thing no adult in that house would say. She said, I don't think it was a loan. I was little, but I remember Grandpa. He wouldn't have." And she squeezed my sleeve and let go. I drove home on the dark county road with the heater ticking and my hands very steady on the wheel. And two things were happening in me at once. On top there was the pain, and the pain was enormous. A grief with witnesses, the specific loneliness of being wronged in a crowd. But underneath the pain, something colder and clearer was rising, and it was the thing my niece had just handed me without meaning to. Why now? That was the question. Why? 4 years after my father died, 9 years after the closing. Was this suddenly a debt with interest, and a handwritten amortization, and a mother's convenient forgetting? Corinne didn't do arithmetic for fun. Nobody compounds 6% over 9 years as a hobby. Something had made $1,200 into a number that mattered right now. Payroll. Grant's company. In trouble, really in trouble. The debt wasn't a principal. The debt was a lifeline. They didn't believe I owed them money. They needed me to. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole story. I got home. I turned on one lamp. I sat in my father's gift, my little west-facing house on Alder Street, and I did not pour a drink, and I did not call a friend, and I did not post anything anywhere. I sat very still, the way you sit when a plan is assembling itself behind your eyes, and you don't want to scare it off. And then I remembered the envelope. I don't know what brought it back. Maybe it was Josie saying Grandpa. Maybe it was the word house surfacing out of 9 years of dark. But all at once, I was on my feet and walking to the closet. And I was pulling out the small gray fireproof box, the one with the birth certificate and the passport and the deed. My hands were steady. My hands are always steady. That's the job. I opened the box. And there, near the bottom, a little yellowed at the edge, was a plain manila envelope with one word on the front in blocky, careful, shaking capital letters. House, my father's handwriting. 4 years in the ground, and there was his hand, on the envelope, exactly where he'd put it, waiting. I sat down on the floor of my closet, 41 years old, and I held that envelope for a long moment before I opened it, because I already half knew, and knowing was almost too much. Then I lifted the flap, and I drew out a single folded page, and I opened it under the closet light. There it was, the gift letter, a little stiff from the years, and there, at the bottom, 2 signatures. My father's, shaking and blocky, and beside it, my mother's, in that neat schoolteacher cursive. The same hand that 3 hours ago had told 11 people she didn't remember it being a gift. And above their names, in the flat, unfeeling type of a bank form, one line. This is a bona fide gift with no expectation of repayment. And the credit union's notary stamp. Dated 9 years ago. Round and blue and absolutely certain. I read it maybe 6 times. My mother had signed under the words no expectation of repayment, and then sat at a table and expected repayment. $61,200 of it, with interest. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest with you about that, because it wasn't a movie moment, no music swelled. What I felt first was grief, fresh grief, because holding my father's handwriting was holding his hand again, and his hand had shaken, and he had known. No strings. A house is a place they can't take from you. He hadn't meant the world after all. He hadn't meant landlords or bad luck. He had meant them, his own family. He had looked down the years from his sickbed and seen exactly this coming, and he had reached out with a shaking hand and a single sheet of paper, and he had made me a shield, and he had labeled it house, and he had told me to keep it where it wouldn't burn. And I had, without knowing why. For 9 years, I sat on that closet floor and I said out loud, to no one, to him, "Okay, Dad, okay." And then the cold, clear thing under the pain took over completely. And here is where you learn what kind of woman I actually am. Because a lot of people would have done what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was drive straight back to my mother's house, walk into that dining room, slap the letter on the table, and read their own words into their faces while the pot roast went cold. I wanted the 11 to watch me be right. I didn't do that. I'm an ER nurse. In the ER, you learn the most important thing there is to know about a crisis, which is that the first instinct is almost always the wrong one. The loud move feels good and does nothing. You don't rush. You stabilize. You gather. You make sure that when you act, it's final. I had the letter in my hand. My copy. But a copy can be called a fake. A copy can be called a forgery, a trick. Della made that up on her computer. Corinne was already telling a story where I was a liar, and a piece of paper only I possessed would just become part of the lie. I could hear her already. How convenient, Della, that you suddenly have a document. Where's it been? Why haven't we seen it? You could have typed that up last night. I needed the truth to come from somewhere they couldn't touch. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere that didn't love me or hate me and had no dog in the family fight. The credit union. Because here is the thing about a gift letter for a mortgage. My copy wasn't the only copy. The lender required it, the lender took it, the lender kept it. It was part of the closing file, the official record of the loan, retained by the institution for exactly as long as institutions keep such things, which is a long time. Somewhere in the credit union's archive, in their system, was their own certified copy of that same letter, with those same 2 signatures, that same notary stamp, sitting in a file that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the law. So I did not slap anything on any table. I photographed the letter first, both sides, in good light, and I saved the photos in 3 places, because I keep everything and I back up everything, because I am exactly the woman they assumed I wasn't. Then I slid the letter back into my father's house envelope, and I put the envelope back in the fireproof box, and I closed the box, and I told not one single living soul what I had found. Not Josie. Not a friend. No one. In a family that had just decided in unison to look away from me, silence was the only thing that was fully mine. And the next morning, early before my shift, I got in my car and I drove downtown to the little credit union on Main with the eagle on the sign, the same one that had handled my closing 9 years before. I walked in when they unlocked the doors. And I sat down across the desk from a loan officer, a kind-eyed woman about my age, and I said, in my steady voice, that I needed to request a certified copy of a document from a mortgage closing file from 9 years ago, a gift letter. She started typing. She asked me for the loan number, the address, the date. Alder Street, I told her. And she typed, and she frowned a little at her screen, and she scrolled, and the seconds stretched out long and thin while I sat there with my hands folded and my heart doing something my face would never show, because I did not actually know if it was still there. 9 years is a long time. Files get purged. Systems get migrated. The whole plan, my father's whole shield, depended on a stranger's hard drive having remembered what my own mother had chosen to forget. The loan officer stopped scrolling. She looked at her screen for a moment. Then she looked up at me, and she opened her mouth to tell me what she had found. The loan officer turned her monitor a few degrees, the way people do when they want you to see a thing for yourself. And she said, "It's here." The whole closing packet scanned in, including a gift letter. I did not move. I kept my hands folded. But something inside my chest, something that had been clenched since the lawyer's envelope hit my kitchen table, let go by a single notch. "You can print me a certified copy?" I asked. "I can. It takes a couple of days for the stamp and the seal. We keep the originals imaged, and the bank retains its own record of every gift letter, separate from your file. Lender requirement. It never leaves us." She smiled, kind-eyed, a little curious. "Is everything all right?" I said everything was fine. I said I was just tidying up some old paperwork for family. Which was true. It was the truest thing I had said out loud in weeks. So now I want you to understand exactly what I was holding when I walked back out into the morning. I had my father's letter, the one he sealed in the envelope marked house, in his blocky hand, and set in my fireproof box 9 years ago. And I now had the credit union's own certified duplicate on its way. 2 copies. 2 signatures apiece, his and my mother's, side by side, dated, notarized by a bank officer who had no dog in this fight and never would. The letter said, in plain lender language, that the $38,500 was a bona fide gift. No expectation of repayment. Signed, Walter Marsh. Signed, Eleanor Marsh. My mother had sat at a dinner table with 11 relatives and said she didn't remember it being a gift. But her hand remembered. Her hand had written it down. I got in my car. I drove the 40 minutes to the hospital. I clocked in. I ran my shift like I run every shift. Calm in the loud room, steady when the monitors scream. Because that is what I am, and that is what I have always been. Whatever my family decided to believe about me. And I told no one. That was the whole plan. Silence. Let them keep talking. Let them build their case on the one thing they were certain of, which was that I had saved nothing and kept nothing and would fold the moment the pressure came. Now I could have driven straight to my mother's house that same afternoon and slapped the letter on her table the way Corinne slapped down her little handwritten sum. I thought about it. I am human. But I have spent 20 years in emergency rooms, and if that work teaches you anything, it teaches you that the loudest response is almost never the strongest one. You wait for the right moment. You let the picture come clear. You don't waste your best card on a bad hand. So I went to Sunday dinner. I want you to picture it, because I lived it, and it took everything I had. The same dining room. The same 11 faces, more or less. Some of them not quite meeting my eyes anymore, because a family had made a decision about me and they were all being polite about it. My mother at the head of the table, where my father used to sit. Grant beside her, big and easy, the golden boy, laughing a little too loud. Corinne next to him, watchful, and me, sitting there passing the potatoes, acting like a woman who had no idea what to do. That was the part that cost me. Not the anger, the pretending. Letting them think they had me. Grant did most of the talking. He always does. He talked about the season being slow but picking up. About a big commercial job that was going to change everything. About how the family had to stick together in hard times. He looked right at me when he said that last part. Stick together. As if I were the one pulling away. Then Corinne leaned in, over her wine, in that gentle, reasonable voice she uses when she is about to say something that isn't gentle at all. "Della, honey, we don't want this to be ugly. We really don't. Grant and I were talking, and we thought, maybe a payment plan. Something small every month, so it doesn't have to hang over everybody. A payment plan. On money my dying father pressed into my hand and told me no one could ever take. I set down my fork. I kept my face soft, and I said I'd have to look at my budget. Corinne's eyes brightened, just a flicker, because she heard exactly what she wanted to hear. She heard a woman negotiating. You do not negotiate over a thing you can prove is a lie. She heard surrender dressed up as caution. And then she nearly caught me. She tilted her head and she asked, so lightly, you didn't happen to keep anything from back then, did you? Any of Dad's papers? I only ask because it would help us sort the numbers if there was anything. The room did a small thing. It held still. My heart went sideways. But I have a nurse's face. I have a face I have built over 2 decades of telling frightened people calm things in the worst hour of their lives. And I used it. You know me, I said. I keep everything organized. That was all. I let it sit there, plain and dull, and I watched Corinne decide what it meant. She wanted it to mean I was a tidy, harmless, overwhelmed woman with her receipts in a shoebox. So that is what she decided it meant. She smiled and patted my arm and said we'd figure it out together, as a family. I keep everything organized. God's honest truth. Every word of it. And she heard defeat. That was the moment I knew the letter would land the way I needed it to. Because they were not looking for it. They had built their whole assault on the certainty that it did not exist. I went home. I did not sleep well. Pretending is heavier than fighting. The formal letter came 11 days later. Not from Corinne this time. From an attorney, on real letterhead, the kind of letterhead meant to make your stomach drop. It laid it out in cold paragraphs. A loan of $38,500, extended 9 years prior. Interest at 6%, compounded, a total now due of $61,200. I had 30 days to pay or to arrange payment before they filed in small claims court. 30 days. I read it standing at my kitchen table, the same table where the first letter had landed, and I felt the fear a person is supposed to feel when a lawyer puts a number on your life. And then I felt something steadier come up underneath it. Because I had the answer to that letter sitting in a fireproof box 20 feet away, and a certified twin of it locked in a bank vault downtown. But I am careful. My father was careful, and he taught me to be. So the next morning I did not go to war. I made an appointment with a legal aid attorney 2 towns over. A tired man with a warm handshake and a stack of files a foot high. The kind of lawyer who helps people who can't buy the fancy letterhead. I laid it all out for him. My father's letter. The credit union's certified copy. The demand. Corinne's handwritten arithmetic. He looked at the gift letter for a long time. Then, he set it down, and he said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. Miss Marsh, this is dispositive. That's the legal word for it. A signed, notarized gift letter on the lender's own form from the closing itself. There's no loan here. There was never a loan. You don't owe a cent, and any judge in this state would see that in about 90 seconds. I asked him what I should do. He said, you could send this to their lawyer today, and the whole thing evaporates by email. He paused. Or, I already knew my or. I had known it since the loan officer turned her screen toward me. I was not going to end this in an email that only Corinne's lawyer would ever read. My mother had denied my father's word in front of 11 people. That is where the wound was made, in that room, in front of those eyes. And that is where it was going to be closed. In front of the same eyes. Not one fewer. So I let the clock run. I let the 30 days breathe. And it turned out I didn't have to do anything to bring the family back to the table. Because Grant did it for me. Grant was drowning, and drowning men make noise. The call started, first to my cousins, then to the aunts, then to anyone who would listen. Della was refusing to make Mom whole. Della had turned her back on the family the moment Dad was in the ground. Della had money, plenty of it, a nurse's steady salary and a paid-down house, and she was letting her own mother twist in the wind out of spite. I heard it third hand, then second hand, then I heard it from Josie. She called me on a Wednesday night, my 17-year-old niece, her voice low the way it gets when she shut her bedroom door. And she told me it was worse than anyone was saying at the barbecues. Aunt Della, it's not about principle. I heard Dad on the phone with the bank. They missed payroll. The guys didn't get paid last Friday. He keeps saying if he can just get the 60 grand, he can hold on till the commercial job funds. She was quiet a second. It was never about the money being a loan. He needs it. That's all it ever was. And there it was. The last loop, closed. The why now. It was never about my father's memory or my mother's dignity or the family's honor. It was a hole in a business, and I was the patch they had all agreed to become. Then Josie told me the part that turned my blood cold and clear at the same time. Grant had started saying he'd contest Dad's estate too, if he had to. And Grandma, my mother, had gotten frightened enough, cornered enough, that she'd told Grant she would testify, in court, under oath, that the money was a loan. My own mother, ready to raise her right hand and swear against her own signature. For one long night, that landed on me like the whole thing might really come down to her word against mine. The good son and the grieving mother on one side. The daughter nobody quite believed on the other. That is how these things go, isn't it? That is how the quiet ones lose. Except it was never going to be my word against my mother's. That's the thing they none of them understood. It was going to be my mother's word against my mother's own hand. And a hand doesn't revise its memory. Ink doesn't get frightened at a dinner table. Ink just sits there and says what it said. I called my mother that week, and I did the one warm thing I had left in me to do. I asked her, gently, to host Sunday dinner. The whole family. Everyone who had been there the first time. I said I wanted to talk about the money like adults, all together, put it to rest. I heard the relief in her voice. She thought I was coming to fold. She thought her frightened daughter was finally going to lie down. She said yes. She said, "That's the right thing, Della." She even sounded proud of me, and it broke something small in my chest to hear it. Because I loved her. And she had signed her name beside my father's, and she had chosen to forget. I hung up. I took my father's house envelope out of the fireproof box. I took the certified copy from the credit union out of its stiff bank folder. I put both and the lawyer's demand letter into a plain folder. And on Sunday, I drove the 40 minutes to my mother's house with all three riding quiet on the passenger seat. It was the same room. I need you to sit in it with me, because I have never been calmer in my life, and I have never been more afraid. Both at the same time, the way you are when you finally do the hard right thing. 11 of them. My mother at the head. Grant flushed and loud, already talking about being reasonable, about a fresh start, about how nobody wanted lawyers. Corinne beside him with her folder, my niece Josie small and silent down the table with her eyes on her plate. Ray, the cousin who'd carried Grant's barbecue story around like gospel. The aunts. The rest. Grant opened it. He always opens it. Della. We're all really glad you came. I think it says a lot. Now, Corinne worked up a fair schedule. Real gentle terms. And I think if we just... I set my folder on the table, on the same wood where my father used to carve the Sunday roast. And I said, in my steady room full of strangers' voice, before anybody works up anything, I want to read you something. It won't take a minute. I opened the folder, and I laid down the manila envelope first, right in the center of the table, where everyone could see my father's blocky handwriting on the front. House. 6 letters in the hand they all knew. The hand that had signed their birthday cards and their graduation checks. The hand 4 years in the ground. The room got very quiet. My mother's eyes went to that envelope and stayed. Then I took out the gift letter. The original. And beside it I laid the credit union's certified copy, with its raised seal, its stamp, its clean bank official signature, swearing it was a true duplicate of the record. "This is from the closing on Alder Street," I said, 9 years ago. "The credit union required it before they'd lend me the rest. It's a gift letter. The bank made Dad and Mom sign it so the down payment couldn't be a secret loan. It had to be one or the other, in writing, or the mortgage didn't happen." Nobody breathed. Corinne had gone still in a new way, and I read it out loud. Slowly, every word. "This is a bona fide gift. There is no expectation of repayment, now or in the future." I looked up. Signed Walter Marsh. Signed Eleanor Marsh. Dated notarized by an officer of the credit union who witnessed both signatures. I let it sit. Then I said the only hard sentence I had let myself save. "You signed it a gift. I'm only reading your own handwriting back to you." Corinne moved first. She reached across the table and pulled the certified copy toward her, fast, the way you grab for something that's falling. Her whole case had been one belief, and one belief only, that no paper existed. That 9 years and a shredder had erased it. She scanned it. I watched her look for the crack, the loophole, the way people like her always look. She said, This must have meant something different back then. Banks have all kinds of forms. This doesn't mean it wasn't also." And then her eyes hit the notary date and the notary seal, and the sentence just died in her mouth. There is nothing you can say to a notarized date. It doesn't argue back. It just is. She set the paper down very carefully, like it had gotten hot, and she didn't finish. Grant reached for the copy next, and I watched my brother read the words that meant there was no loan. No loan to demand, no loan to sue on, no $61,200 with its clever compounded interest. Because you cannot charge interest on a gift, and the gift was signed and sealed and sworn 9 years before he needed it to be a debt. His face went through something. The big, easy salesman face just came apart at the seams. And into that dead silent room, in front of every relative he'd been calling for a month, he said the thing that told the whole truth. He said, "Lo, we just Della," we thought, "with the business the way it's been the business." There it was, out loud, at last. Not a loan, not principal, not Mom's dignity. The business. 11 people heard him say it. Ray heard him say it. The story Grant had spent a month planting around every barbecue in the county died right there in his own mouth, in his own mother's dining room. I didn't have to say a word. He confessed the motive himself, and I just let it hang in the air where everybody could smell it. And then my mother. She hadn't reached for anything. She was staring at the original letter, at the 2 signatures side by side, hers and my father's, close together on the line the way the bank had made them sign. 70 years old, and I watched her try, one last time, to hold on to the version she'd built, the one where she didn't remember, the one where it might have been a loan. I watched it slip out of her hands. Because you cannot argue with your own handwriting when it's sitting 8 inches from your face with your dead husband's name right beside it. Her hand came up, slow, and her fingers touched the paper, touched her own signature. And she said, so quietly that the whole table had to lean in to hear it, "Your father wanted it that way." That was all. Your father wanted it that way. Not "I'm sorry," not yet, not there. But it was the truth, and it was the first true thing she'd said about that money in a month, and everyone at that table heard my mother admit that she had known all along. It had never been my word against hers. I'd never had to make it that. Her own signature had done it for me, quiet as ink. And then, down at the end of the table, a chair scraped. Josie, my 17-year-old niece, who slid me the truth when no adult in that room would. She stood up, and she picked up her plate and her glass, and in front of her father and her mother and 11 relatives, she walked around the table and set her things down in the empty place beside me, and sat down. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. A 17-year-old had just told an entire family which side of the table the truth was on, and she'd done it without one word. I put my hand over hers. I didn't trust my voice yet. I'd like to tell you there was a big scene after that. There wasn't. That's not how these things really end. What happens is the air just goes out of the whole thing. The certainty that had puffed everybody up for a month, that had them all so sure, so united in looking away from me, it just leaked out of the room and left them small and quiet in their chairs. An aunt started clearing plates that weren't ready to be cleared, just to have something to do with her hands. Ray wouldn't look at Grant. Corinne folded her little amortization paper in half, and then in half again, until it was a tight small square, and she put it in her purse, and nobody ever saw it again. I gathered my father's letter and the certified copy back into the folder. I stood. I said, "I'm not asking anybody for anything. I never was. I just wasn't going to pay a debt I don't owe on a gift my father gave me while he was dying." And I said goodnight to my mother, and I kissed the top of Josie's head, and I drove the 40 minutes home in a quiet so clean it almost hurt. I lifted my hand against no one. I want you to hear that. I didn't have to. The rest of it happened on its own, the way the truth collects its debts on a schedule that has nothing to do with you. The demand letter was withdrawn inside of 2 weeks. My legal aid attorney sent 1 page to Corinne's lawyer, 1 page with the gift letter attached, and that was the end of the $61,200. Their lawyer, I heard later, billed Grant for the work and got them exactly nothing for the money, which is its own small kind of justice. You hire a lawyer to collect a debt that was never real, you still pay the lawyer. And the business. Grant's company folded that autumn, right on the schedule it had been sliding toward all along. The commercial job that was going to save everything fell through the way those things do when a firm is already too far gone. And here's the part I sat with a long time. The $61,200 would never have saved him. Not even close. A hole that big doesn't get plugged by one desperate grab from your sister. If I had paid every cent, if I had drained my savings and mortgaged my paid-down house on Alder Street to make my brother whole, it would have bought him maybe 2 more months. And then the same collapse, on top of my ruin instead of only his. My father's letter didn't just protect my house. It protected me from going down inside somebody else's sinking business out of guilt. I didn't wreck Grant. I just declined to be lashed to the deck of a ship that was already going under. That's the passive kind of justice. It doesn't need your hands. It only needs you to stop volunteering to drown. It's autumn now, real autumn, the good kind, the kind my father loved. I'm on my porch on Alder Street with a cup of coffee going cold the way I always let it, because I get to talking or thinking and I forget to drink it. There's a storm door here that sticks in the frame, has for years. The kind of small, stubborn thing my father would have fixed in 10 minutes, with a screwdriver and a little muttering. I look at it, and I think of him, and I've decided I'll fix it myself this month. He'd like that better anyway. Josie's inside at my kitchen table, doing her homework. She comes by after school now, 2 or 3 times a week. The 40-minute nothing between our houses, no obstacle at all, to a girl with a used car and a reason. She's applying to nursing programs. She didn't tell her parents that first. She told me. We sit at that table, and she asks me about the hard shifts, and I tell her the truth. That some nights break your heart, and you go back anyway. And she nods like she already understands it, and maybe she does. Corinne doesn't host the family letters anymore. There are no more letters. That whole enterprise closed up shop the day her folded square went into her purse. She and I are polite at the 2 family things a year we both still attend. A careful, weatherproof politeness. And that's the shape of it now, and that's fine. Grant sends me a text every couple of months. Short ones. Hey, hope you're well. Thinking of you. I don't always answer, and I've made my peace with that. I don't owe him anger any more than I owed him $61,200. I just don't owe him a reply either. And it turns out, you're allowed to simply set a thing down and not carry it. And my mother. My mother came by once. In the spring, before all this settled into what it is now. She stood on my porch, on this porch, and she looked at my father's storm door, and she said the two words she'd owed me for a year. I'm sorry. Just that. And I believe she meant it, as much as she's able. I held the door open for her. I made her coffee. I was kind. Because I am kind, that's not a wound they ever managed to reach. But I'll tell you what I noticed, standing there with the door open in my hand. I held it open. I didn't walk back through it. There's a difference, and it took me 41 years and one manila envelope to learn it. You can forgive somebody and still not move back into the house you left. You can hold the door open and stay right where you are. On the good side of it, in the home nobody can take from you. Last week I took my father's house envelope out of the fireproof box, and I read the gift letter one more time. His blocky signature and my mother's beside it, the notary's seal. The plain lender words about a bona fide gift and no expectation of repayment. And I folded it back up, careful, along the same creases his hands had made. And I slid it back into the envelope with his handwriting on the front. And I put it back in the box where it's lived for 10 years now, where it'll live for the rest of my life. Because here's the whole thing, the only thing, the truth I'd trade the entire ugly year for, if a year's the price of learning it. A kindness that gets written down stays a kindness. It sits there in ink, patient, unafraid, exactly as generous as the day it was signed. It's only memory that can be rewritten. Memory bends when a business is failing, and a mother is frightened, and a family decides all at once to look away from the one person who never asked them for a thing. Memory is soft. But my father, dying, knew something about the softness of memory and about the people he was leaving behind, and so he did the one hard, practical, loving thing. He wrote it down, and he sealed it in an envelope with 6 blocky letters on the front. And he handed his quiet, careful daughter a shield she wouldn't need to open for 9 years. I never threw it away. I'm exactly the woman they assumed I wasn't. If you've ever been treated as invisible by your own family, if you've ever been the steady one everybody counts on and nobody quite sees, I want you to hear this from someone who's been there. Keep your kindness. Keep your records, too. And when they decide to forget, you don't have to shout. You just have to be able to read their own handwriting back to them. That's my story. Tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city. I'd love to see how far this one travels.